The Contextualize series was originally intended as a short side project that began in 2015 in an attempt to prevent discussion of the major arcana from clogging up my video on the use of the tarot as a symbol for archetypes in the Persona series. Now 3 years have passed, the series is by far the most popular thing on my channel, ancient, poor and loathed attempts at reviewing magical girl anime notwithstanding, and I'm still not done with covering even half of the cards. Oops! In any case, seeing how the landscape of the Persona series has changed in the past couple of years, especially with the release of Persona 5, leading to the introduction of a whole slew of new characters to include in the analysis of the series' use of Arcana, I think it's about time for a little roundup of those unlucky Persona 5 characters that got left out of my attempts at covering the Arcana the first time around. It's time to give Wen Amamiya, again I refuse to use the manga name, Morgana, Makoto Nijima, Haru Okumura and Yusuke Kitagawa a fair chance of proving themselves worthy of the Arcana assigned to them and their personas in the game. Oh, and also there's this guy. Yeah, I guess I'll mention him. Oh boy. As probably expected by the nature of this discussion, this video is going to be jam-packed with spoilers for Persona 5, so please err on the side of caution. I also won't take the time to explain every single arcana in detail again, so if you want to understand what's going on, I highly advise you to pause the video now and check out previous entries into the series first. A link to the playlist can be found in the description. Oh, and also I won't cover anything involving Persona Q2 in this video, since the game only just came out in Japanese, which wouldn't be fair towards anyone, including me, because I haven't finished it yet. Alright, enough of the rambling. Let's get into this, shall we? Number 0, The Fool, Wen Amamiya and someone else. I see a lot of people trying to apply unusual interpretations of the Fool Arcana to Joker, aka Wen, based on misconceptions such as the idea that Persona 5 intentionally uses only the reverse meaning of the Arcana, or that Wen is somehow more inherently expressive than other protagonists. So let's get those claims out of the way first. Number 1. No, Persona 5's Confidantes and Personas aren't based on the reverse arcana any more than those of previous games. And number 2, Wen does, in fact, not talk considerably more than the other protagonists. That's a misconception born from how Persona 5 was localized. The narration of Persona 3, 4 and 5 is written in an entirely perspective-neutral style in the Japanese version, which gives no indication of who the narrator actually is. In English, that sort of style is pretty much impossible, due to the inherent need for pronouns in the language. So the translators need to actively decide whether to use first, second or third person perspective when translating this sort of text. The translation teams of Persona 3 and 4 decided to use second person, while the team for Persona 5 decided to use first person, probably because it reflected the UI stylization of the narration as thought bubbles better. That's literally the only real difference here, and it's got nothing to do with Wen's expressiveness as a character. Alright? Alright. Now, moving on. Way back in the first Contextualize episode, I referred to the Fool as a trickster or traveler, and while both these interpretations apply to Joker in the same way they apply to other protagonists, I think in his case, the focus on the trickster aspect of the card is stronger than the traveler aspect, because, Wen still undergoes the usual journey, setting off at 0, the Fool, and arriving at 21, the Vault. But unlike Makoto Yuki and Yu Narukami, his journey is stalled due to his status as a prisoner of fate. He lacks the freedom to do and choose as he pleases. His limitless possibilities are limited by the world around him. What squarely keeps Wen within the card's archetype, though, is the fact that he doesn't allow these things to truly limit him. He sneaks around, finds loopholes, and bends the rules to take the freedom of limitless possibilities that he's actually supposed to have. In this way, Wen is probably the most active of the wildcard protagonists in actually enforcing his status as such. Wen's status as a trickster directly plays into his status as a traveler too. He's a traveler who needs to sneak around and find loopholes in order to progress on his journey without being caught or held back. Of course, in terms of gameplay, this doesn't really change much, but it adds a nice thematic flavor. Persona 5 is still all about finding your own way to live as yourself, even when the world around you stands in your way, and the way Ren is treated by society around him and how it plays into his arcana plays a great part in conveying that theme, showing a more active side to the human potential expressed in the full arcana than previous protagonists. Of course, the full arcana isn't only expressed by Ren in this game, at least not entirely. For the first time, it also makes an appearance as the assigned arcana of a singular person's social link, Confidant. Or at least that's how the game seems to play it. The so-called Prison Master Confidant is introduced to us as a plot-sensitive social link with the recurring support character Igor. However, seasoned players will quickly realize that something is just very, very off about that long-nosed man before us. And wouldn't you know it? Bam! Yaldabaoth, God of Order, final boss of the game! Interestingly, this isn't the first time that the writers of these games intended to allow us to establish a social link with the game's final boss in disguise, as unused data in Persona 4 established that a social link with Izanami disguised as the gas station attendant was originally planned but scrapped. That's another story entirely though. Now, to be perfectly honest, Yaldabaoth's association with the full arcana in Persona 5 never exactly made perfect sense to me. I mean, sure, you can relate him to the arcana if you really try to, but that's true for pretty much every arcana and every character. There isn't really anything striking about Yaldabaoth that just screams full arcana. In fact, it feels more like the opposite, since as an embodiment of the concept of order, he stands in direct opposition to the chaotic nature of the arcana and the possibilities that chaos brings. However, one also has to remember that having a confidant or a social link with a deity like Yaldabaoth is a special case to begin with, since deities in the Persona universe aren't really people as much as they are symbols. They represent culture and society in its purest form, hence why they will often take self-destructive or even internally illogical actions. Their thoughts don't need to be wise or make sense. They're simply representative of the thoughts and will of the masses. Seen that way, the Prison Master Confidant's relationship to the full arcana suddenly makes a lot more sense, since it's not just about Ren's relationship with the man behind the desk in the Velvet Room, but rather his relationship with society itself. We don't learn that much about Yaldabaoth as a person in his social link, because he isn't really a person. Much more than anything else, he is a mirror of the society around Ren, which both stifles and also drives him on. And Ren's conversations with Yaldabaoth often reflect how that society sees him and his friends, and how it either embraces or rejects them. It makes perfect sense that Ren's own arcana serves as a symbol of this bond, since this specific confidant is all about how Ren, on his journey past the hurdles the world throws in his path, sees and interacts with the world around him. The Fool, the arcana of quintessential humanity, becomes a symbol of the protagonist's relationship to humanity at large, and the possibilities it brings. And talking about inherent possibilities of being human... Number 1. The Magician, Morgana. I remember that Morgana being revealed as the Magician Arcana of Persona 5 came as a surprise to me, since the Arcana had previously been firmly in the grasp of some of the most down-to-earth, average people in the franchise. However, Morgana's personality and deep admiration for humans manages to place him squarely in the same situation as Yuka, Junpei, and Yusuke. He is performing in front of others to be the cool, useful self he wants to be seen as. The Magician Arcana deals with the human power of growth and change, and the struggles humans have with skillfully channeling and controlling said power as they mature. Morgana isn't inherently human, but his desire to be one is quite similar. He wants to find a way to belong to the world he loves. Thus, his magician's performance is all about trying to be the human he thinks he should be, even if his nature betrays that image. And I don't just mean physically. His serious, controlled outer front is pretty thin and breaks away much too easily, especially in his bickering with Ryuji. Yeah, the Chariot and the Magician have an interesting dynamic, as they're both cards that are connected to impulsive actions in one way or another. So it isn't that much of a surprise that we've had two magician chariot pairs now that keep being at each other's throats. In a lot of ways, Morgana is like a human teenager. He's confused about his place in life, and though he knows absolutely who he wants to be, he's not sure if he's actually good enough to perform for the part. He shares that central character conflict with Yusuke and Junpei, and is just as prone to rash, thoughtless actions as they are. Oh, and since back in the magician video I showed example clips of Junpei and Yusuke acting thoughtless, here!
I'm going to show you who the useless one actually is.
Alright then, bring it on!
Well, this is goodbye. Morgana, wait! See you.
Honestly, I could rant about that scene for days, but just know that Morgana's complexes get in the way of his brain just as often as Ryuji's do. I see no innocent parties in this scene. Just morons. Number 2. The Priestess. Makoto Nijima. What an odd addition to the Arcana. Previous Priestess persona users in the series were strongly defined by their reserved passive personalities, and had an arc that revolved around harnessing their own passive power and turning it into strength to take control over their lives. The same does apply to Makoto. However, what makes her stand out is how utterly determined she is to not be passive. Whenever we see Makoto in the game, she is doing something, gathering intel, making conclusions, stalking you, wiretapping you, trying to reason with crime lords, running a goddamn motorcycle into a shadow's face. She's not the sort of character you would immediately relate to the archetypal concept of passive strength. But I think that's the crux of her character. While Makoto does take action, early on it's often out of a sense of duty put on her by others, rather than out of her own intuition. She even denies her desire to join the police force early on in her Confidant, just because her father once told her not to pursue that career. Like Maki, Fuka and Yukiko, other people's expectations and her own life have forced Makoto into a position where she isn't really the mistress of her own destiny. And just like her priestess colleagues, Makoto needs to find the inner power and wisdom needed to take control of the status ascribed to her and make it her own, deciding to stand up against society and even go up against her sister if she has to, as well as telling her friend Eiko straight out how she feels about said friend's boyfriend, are things Makoto does because they feel right, rather than because she's been taught to do them. Allowing herself to trust her own intuition and take charge of even the most passive aspects of her life is how the internal power of the priestess manifests in her. Not to mention that her persona is literally Pope Joan, who I talked about way back during the priestess video. Number 3. The Empress. Haru Okumura. The reveal of this character's Arcana was another surprise. Given her design and soft demeanor, reminiscent of Fuka Yamagishi, a lot of players expected her to fall into another Arcana such as the Priestess. Compared to previous Empress Arcana persona users like Yukino Mayuzumi or Mitsudo Kirijo, Haru does seem to lack the commanding presence that had been a hallmark of the Arcana up to this point. However, when recalling the core meaning of the Arcana, Haru is still a pretty perfect match. Contrasting with the Priestess Arcana, the Empress is about quintessential femininity as expressed in both creative and destructive powers inherent in motherhood. She both nurtures and punishes, and holds uncontrollable strength that cannot be subjugated by anyone. Despite her reserved personality, these are traits that apply to Haru just as well as they apply to Yukino, Mitsuru and Margaret. Haru has a strong nurturing side that comes out in her treatment of Morgana and her approach to raising vegetables and making coffee. However, she can also be vicious when crossed, which is reflected in her fierce, downward cruel approach to battle, where she is a tank and a force to be reckoned with. Some of her quotes are quite interesting as well.
Boom! Kaboom! You shouldn't annoy a girl with an axe!
However, above all else, Haru, once in touch with her desires and fully awakened to her persona, cannot be controlled against her will. Not only does she immediately distrust the motivations of the Okamura Foods employees around her after her father's passing, she also begins working to call off her arranged marriage as soon as possible. Sure, there are hurdles and things that make her doubt her own choices for a short while, but in the end, she doesn't allow herself to be held back. The enormous power and potential she holds is hers and hers alone to do with as she pleases. A true Empress. Number 4. The Emperor. Yusuke Kitagawa. From quintessential femininity to quintessential masculinity, unlike previous Emperor persona users, Yusuke Kitagawa lacks the obvious masculine traits that dominated this arcana, especially during Personas 3 and 4. However, despite him being a more androgynous character, Yusuke Kitagawa still represents the Emperor arcana very well, with his arc focusing on an aspect of the archetype I spoke of a lot in my video about the card. The Emperor's ability to give order to the Empress's creation and shape it. Yusuke's Confüdant represents this in the clearest way possible, with his struggles to put his own emotions as well as those of others onto the canvas. As a deeply emotional person, Yusuke already has all the materials he needs to create his art. This is especially relevant since a lot of his inspiration is derived from his mother, befitting the symbiotic relationship between the Empress and Emperor arcanas. All that's left is to give a rhyme and reason to these feelings, put them into a shape that truly expresses the beauty he wants to create. All that is holding him back is his lack of a clear vision for himself and his fear of losing his way. This law-giving, order-focused attitude is precisely what the Emperor Arcana is all about. Even if, unlike with the likes of Akihiko, it doesn't manifest in actual physical strength and discipline for Yusuke, but as a purely creative power. In that regard, Yusuke seems to be at the very end of a spectrum in which Akihiko sits at the polar opposite end and Kanji smack dab in the middle. Physical power and creativity are both ways in which the Emperor's ability to shape and command creation can be expressed. Akihiko holds physical power, Yusuke holds creative power, Kanji holds both. In that way, Yusuke feels like a fitting way to close out a trilogy of Emperor Arcana persona users, so to speak. Everyone, thank you for joining me on this video. So, a lot of stuff has happened lately, what with Christmas being a thing, Tumblr see me collapsing the way it did, Smash Bros, Deltarune, Persona Q2, and tons of other things. There's so much going on, it can really be difficult to keep up, but I do have quite a few ideas for videos in my head. However, I'm not gonna announce anything quite yet, because as you may have realized by now, I tend not to be able to keep up with schedules I set for myself. So I'd really rather just do and post things as they come to me, at least until I can finally settle into a rhythm that really suits me. To all of you, thank you so much for watching my videos, commenting and supporting me. You all have helped make 2018 a really bright year for me. Let's make sure that 2019 is going to be even better for all of us. Well then, see ya!